Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm MJ James and I write queer, neurodiverse science fiction and fantasy. Today I want to talk about why I write the kind of stories that I do. Specifically, stories with queer and neurodiverse characters at the center. This video is in part a reflection and part personal history and part craft. I'll talk about what led me here, what I've learned along the way, and why this kind of representation is still so important, especially now. So let's dive in. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum about 2 decades ago when I was 24 years old. All my life, I knew there was something different about me. My teachers knew there was something different about me, but we didn't know what it was. See, autism wasn't added to the DSM or the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual for Mental Disorders until about 1994 and the DSM-4. I was already 14 years old at that time, and it took a few years before people really started talking about autism, and specifically the more nuanced aspects of autism. I remember my first exposure to autism was in an introduction to psychology course. I was 16 at the time and a sophomore in college when we watched a video about a young boy, a young white boy, wearing a helmet to protect his head as he rocked and he screamed in a corner. A classmate turned to me and said, "That is like you." But I had a hard time seeing myself in that young boy. Later, I was compared to Rain Man, often. But again, that wasn't me. If you drop a box of matches, I will just stare at them. See, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, pre-hosting the Olympics. Trans wasn't a word I ever heard growing up. My family belonged to a religion that categorized everything based upon a binary gender, and it's a system I never fit into. And as I became an adult, I finally found my own language to describe myself. I called myself a not feminine female. It wasn't right, but it was as close as I could get. It wasn't until I was much older that I first heard the term non binary. And then later found the term agender, and having found solace in finally having the language to describe that part of myself. When I started writing seriously, meaning when I came back to writing after raising my children, I purposely wanted to create a place for readers to find themselves within my pages. Wanted to write autistic adult individuals. When I wrote my debut novel, In Between, I was trying to write a story about a character who wasn't interested in romance. And in the process, I discovered aromanticism. Writing became a mirror. It's a way to reflect and recognize myself in ways I had never been allowed to before. My writing has grown as a result, and one of the ways it has done so is in my series, the Embertown series, which is a way for me to provide even more representation so that everyone can see themselves reflected in the pages that they read. So why does representation matter? Representation isn't just about visibility. It's about possibility. When people like us don't appear in stories, the message is you don't matter. You don't exist. Or worse, you shouldn't. And even now, when there's more rep out there than there used to be, it's often limited. Queer characters are still often side characters. Neurodiverse characters are still defined by suffering or exceptionalism. They have unnamed and have to have a unique skill to be of value instead of being of value just because we exist, because the characters exist. But when I write, I get to build new possibilities. I get to show that queer, neurodiverse people can be the main characters, that we can be soft, brave, angry, joyful, complicated. And when readers find those characters and say, I saw myself here, that's when I know it matters. Let's talk about some common tropes and why I write what I do instead. There are so many common tropes, such as queer characters whose only arc is pain or coming out. I recently picked up a book that I'm choosing not to mention directly by name. It was marketed as having LGBTQIA plus representation, but was the representation included was between a young couple that was doomed for failure. And while I'm certain that the author, who I believe is not queer, had good intentions for this representation, and they didn't see the harm that was caused by the only queer rep in the book being a doomed romance. And as opposed to that, the heterosexual couple that was a fated pair from the start of time. Also, there is a trope that LGBTQIA plus characters can only be involved in a romance. Well, guess what? We can be included outside of romance. A person is still gay, a lesbian, bi, pansexual, queer without being in a relationship. Or they can also be in a straight passing relationship, and that does not negate their identity. Not to mention all the identities that are not necessarily going to mention being aromantic, which typically does not fall into a relationship, or being asexual, which may not be in a physically intimate relationship. There's a diverse amount of relationships that can exist, and all those relationships are valid, and all queer representation is valid whether or not it is appearing in a romance or in a romantic situation. Oh, another common trope is that autistic characters are emotionless logic machines. I get it. I relate to the robots also. As a child, I idolized Data on Star Trek The Next Generation. He was the closest character to me besides maybe Wesley Crusher, but he's still an android. The problem with only showing autistic representation as machines or aliens is it dehumanizes us. It says we can only understand the context of this behavior if we separate it from humanity. And while as an individual I can still relate to those characters, the only representation on page for us as a community should not be those characters. We are human, and we should have a place within humanity. Autistic people, we're diverse. I may have difficulty with my emotions, and I use my writing to help explore them. But there's also many autistic people that are extremely emotional. They feel very hard. And by only equating us to robots or other emotional logic machines, again, it's dehumanizing us. It's also pigeonholing us into one type of identity instead of celebrating the diversity of what it means to be neurodiverse, or in this case, specifically autistic. And yet, we as autistic people are expected to just take our representation where we can find it. Sherlock Holmes, Sheldon, as two examples. We can love these characters, but we also deserve diverse representation. We deserve characters that show neurodiverse joy, that are not just male, white, emotionalist, and gifted. Another trope is stories that treat identity like an afterthought or an add on. Queer and neurodiverse people deserve to be the center of the page. We exist. We deserve to exist. But they're trying to erase us as they have tried to do before. Books are power. And having people read about themselves let them know that they are not alone. We are not alone. They want us isolated. They want us back in the closet or thinking that the way we are is wrong. This is why it's so important that we tell our stories. And we need more people telling our stories. So please let me know in the comments what your favorite queer books and neurodiverse books are that are written by own voice authors. And while the bigger traditional books are very important, do you have any smaller press or self-published books that you recommend? So now let's talk about what I write. I write something different. I write queer characters who are adults. Riley in the Immortal part of myself doesn't start figuring out her identity until her late 30s. She hadn't had a safe place to do so before. There are many queer and trans adults who are in the same situation, especially in my generation. I feel so much joy when I see children and teenagers given the freedom to explore their identity, but unfortunately, that is not always the case. There are so many fantastic YA books that are queer and several that are neurodiverse. And while we still need more voices in those spaces, I write for the adults and older teenagers who may feel like it's too late to be who they are, but it's never too late. I write autistic characters who stim, who struggle with routine, who mask and unmask, who aren't defined by trauma alone. Stimming is a way of showing joy. It is a way of regulating. It is something that should be celebrated. But often autistic representation written by neurotypical writers is either vilified or it's omitted completely. It is seen as not socially accepted. But I push back on this. I write stories where identity isn't the twist, it's the root of who they are. Being queer, being trans, being autistic, being ADHD, being neurodiverse is not a plot point. It is character development. I write science fiction and fantasy stories, not queer and neurodiverse tragedies. Sure, sometimes my characters are processing their identity, often because it's something I'm working through as well. Lucas, book one of the Embertown series, came about when I realized I probably never will be able to have top surgery. I have to live with the body that I have. The body that I have wanted to adjust since 5th grade. Before I even knew top surgery was a thing. My characters are not me, but I do put parts of myself into them. Books like Neurodiverse, The Immortal Part of Myself, Phoenix, and Inside the Dark Space don't just include queer and neurodiverse characters. They center them. Alright, so let's talk about reader impact and the community connection. Over the last 3 years, readers have told me that they feel seen when they read my books, that they found language for their own identity in one of my books, that they finally saw someone like them survive. And that's why I keep going. Because even when it's hard, and it is hard, even when the publishing world feels hostile, even when the headlines scream hate, our stories matter. Community is what keeps me going. Knowing there are readers out there who need these stories the way I needed them, that's everything. And so I want to thank everyone who I have been able to meet in person, everyone who has responded back to my newsletters, talked to me on social media. I just want to say thank you for reaching out and letting me know the impact that my books have had on you, because it helps give me the strength to battle imposter syndrome and to keep writing when the world seems to be pressing on me to stop. Thank you for listening, for being here, for supporting stories that aren't always easy to tell. If you're a writer, I hope this encourages you to write what matters to you. If you're a reader, thank you for making space for these kinds of stories. I've got more coming. Inside the Dark Space is out on September 1st, and it's one of the most important things I've ever written. I can't wait to share it with you. And as a special thank you, I have set the pre-order price to just 99 cents, which will go to the full price when it is released. And this is a way of allowing it to be accessible by people who may not be able to afford it otherwise, and also helping out when it launches. Because the more people that have pre-ordered it, the more visibility the book will get on launch day. So if you have the ability to pre-order it, I would humbly ask that you please do. It would mean the world to me. Drop a comment if this resonated with you, or if you have any questions about representation, craft, or anything else. If you're part of the queer and neurodiverse community, I see you. You matter. And while Pride is coming to an end, because I did not film this until later, still happy Pride, because it is with us year round. I'll see you in the next video.